All right, Miguel, tell us, why is that your standout track?
Such a good song, man. Such a good song. I've been listening nonstop for this album for the last week just to get more into it. And this song always gets me. It's, to me, what makes this song great is that it has the basic riff is so anthemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you that sense of like something's about to happen, like something, like it builds you up from the beginning, and it never kind of lets you down. And that to me is what makes the song great. It just grabs you to like, kind of like it's pulling you up, has this like forward energy.
Yeah.
The whole time. And then it's like a galloping, like a constant galloping. Like almost like, to me it feels almost like very heavy. The chord is like a very heavy, almost like that has that like metal thing going on.
Yeah,
but it's still so like catchy and poppy and moody. And I love it. And I love it.
I love how that works in its favor. You're saying that that's a good thing about it too, is that it does both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And then, and I just love how the ending, it just so like completely switches what the song is about.
It felt very to me like, I mean, we're talking a lot about grunge and whatnot. It felt like I know we weren't at grunge yet, technically, chronologically, but it kind of like a precursor to grunge. Like I just think about like when the guitars sort of, I mean, it's not distorted, but it does sort of like the bottom drops out and they're all kind of just like it's in this weird noisy limbo, I guess, towards the end.
And the lyrics are, they're just great, and they're very. And I love, and I think that's the advantage of like in Spanish. A lot of the lyrics you can really work with metaphors, visual metaphors, and this song does that beautifully. And to me, it captures something that I understand. You probably doesn't mean much to you folks. Is that it sounds to me like Caracas. It sounds like the city. It has that. It's a little bit dirty. It's a little bit. It's harder on the edges, but it has I don't know. It has a very urban sound to me. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That is it may not mean much to us, but I think I am always seeking that. I am always seeking some kind of like I think place, music in the way that it can translate place, and like the idea of that, the expressing some kind of geographic reality, geographic presence. I think is an underrated element of music, because
it really is.
We think of it so disembodied sometimes, but to hear you say that, I'm like, oh, how do I translate that for myself in other places? Songs that feel like Chicago, or songs that feel like St. Louis, and why those?
And I have a lot of music like that. That to me, it really evokes moments and evokes feelings of a place. And I link a lot of music to that. And to me, and of course, I have that part that doesn't live in Venezuela anymore, so a lot of the music, it's linked to that. So it's very easy to me to go to the place. Also, one of the reasons I love this song is, to me, it's the most different sounding from the album. I think that the album has a very when you said Depeche Mode, I think that's a pretty good example. Like 80s, a bit overly produced album. Electronic, and just has this like
was the time
shiny feeling to it. And this song, I think, just kind of breaks through that a little bit, in the sense that it's the most like back to the roots of being more like a dark post-punk, dark wave kind of band.
It's got some grit to it. I wondered too. I mean, the song is called Resiste. Like how political was this band or this album? I mean, like I looked at the translation, the lyrics, and I'm like, oh, I guess this could be sort of a, political resistance song in some ways, but it doesn't feel like they're really banging you over the head with that. Were they really politically active?
I feel like most bands in the 80s in Venezuela that were political, you had to be, because it was just the times. And Venezuelans by nature, we are extremely political people. It's just kind of, historically, Venezuelans are very much, you either somehow you always have an opinion about what's going on with the government, or you get into politics very early on. And and I think with Venezuelans, there's always a healthy mistrust of the government, always. And I think like all bands in the 80s in particular, there was a huge divide between like extremely rich people and very poor people, there's always a sense that the government was somehow fucking you over.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of bands, if you listen to a lot of bands from that period, all the songs have somehow, there's always one song that is about fuck the government.
Yeah. How would you characterize what they were like politically? Were they considered very gung-ho, or were they a little bit more centrist, a little bit more moderate?
Honestly, I don't know. This is the thing, like that band, I think by the time I really got into them, had already broken up.
Sure. Yeah.
So on their heyday, I was still a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I got more into them after broken up, and I got into the bands of the other members, of the members. But based on what I know, what I've read, what I heard, they had some songs that were definitely had a very strong point of view, like anti-government and anti-establishment kind of thing. But them as a band, they were not like, we are a political band that is just like, screw the government. They were definitely more of a theatrical, like putting really well elaborate shows live. For what I've seen, for what I've read, they were one of the very first Venezuelan bands that tried to link sound with visual with spectacle.
Yeah, I gave you 100,000 points, by the way, for saying that this feels like Caracas. Like that. It transports you to that place.
Yeah.
Let's talk about perfection, shall we?
Sure.
We asked you to nominate 4 perfect albums. And so we're wondering, we didn't define that term for you, perfect. We didn't tell you what we wanted to hear. So what were the standards that you were using to judge these albums against?
To me, a perfect album is an album that is timeless, that it's as good as it was when it came out. To me, a perfect album sometimes is not my favorite album of a band, of a musician. I also think a perfect album is an album that has no fat. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it's a lean, mean machine, man.
Yeah.
It just perfectly goes from one track to another. To me, a perfect album is intentional.
Yes.
It tells a story somehow. So that's kind of what I was going with.
I love all that.
I love also that this album, I mean, you talk about it not having any fat too. Like something I appreciate about this album that I feel was very a big thing in like 80s and 90s. I wouldn't call it a secret track, but I would call it a little. There's a hidden little bit at the end there, and I'm like, oh, I could imagine like owning this CD and like buying it for the first time and getting to that last track and being like, oh, okay, it's like winding down, and be like, why is it still playing? And
yeah. I love that. I miss that. I miss it so much.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and we've talked about doing that on the pod. Actually, we've talked about maybe like, I don't know, including a little secret like
Easter eggs.
You never know.
You never know what's going to happen. Like, it sometimes just makes no sense, but it's just fun. It feels like it's like the artist is giving you like a little hint of a little secret. This is for you.
I love that what you said. I love what you said about it not necessarily being your favorite album, because it does feel like when you have a deep connection with a band, you sort of want to say, oh, well, my favorite album of theirs has to be perfect, right?
Sure.
Trying to separate yourself from that requirement, I think that's an interesting task. If this isn't your favorite of their albums, what is your favorite of their albums?
Oh, no, this one in particular is my favorite of their albums. Okay, I think, like, in general, there's some other...
Doesn't have to be, though.
Doesn't have to be.
Sure.
No, I think a perfect album sometimes has songs that I don't think they're great, but I think they work with the album. I think that's a better explanation.
Yeah.
That's Gans,
A perfect album, to me, it's probably my favorite album. I did not explain that well.
No, that's okay. I think we got there. I think we got it. We turned the corner together on that one, because it's something I think a lot, because we like Radiohead on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, OK Computer and Kid A are essentially perfect albums, right?
Yeah.
And I made my argument for why In Rainbows is also a perfect album.
It is.
I wonder how much of that is the fact that it is my favorite that makes me want to make the argument for that one as opposed to the others. You know
I mean, that's a good example, because I think of Radiohead. OK Computer is my favorite album.
Yeah,
but I would say that Kid A, it's a perfect album.
It is perfect,
and I think it's more perfect than OK Computer.
Oh, I like that. Okay,
I think OK Computer is just brilliant, and it's just seminal music history.
Well, yeah, because OK Computer is like if you took a classic Beatles album and fast forwarded it to the late '90s, added technology and like all the sort of like paranoia that Radiohead was going through. Like that, it feels to me like if the Beatles were in their 20s or 30s in the late '90s, that is the album they would have made.
Yeah, and I also think that this is a good example of what I was saying, that sometimes my favorite album of the band is not what I consider a perfect album.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example, because it also what represents in music, like how music shifted after a certain album. Nirvana is another example. I think Nevermind is a perfect album, but my favorite album from them is In Utero.
Okay.
And I don't think, and I think In Utero is not perfect; it's imperfect. But I think that's what makes it my favorite.
Sure. Yeah. This is all.
So that's so we can go on the rabbit hole with this.
No, that's perfect. One of the questions we like to ask is like, do you feel like when you first are interfacing with a piece of music, do you find that the instrumental music you attach to first, or the lyrics?
Instrumental music for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Always melody, music first, then lyrics.
Gotcha. So since this is such an album that is so emblematic of kind of Venezuela for you, and for people out there who may not speak Spanish, like how do you encourage people to listen to music like this if they don't speak Spanish? I sort of like thinking about it like jazz personally, like sort of absorbing it in that way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think in general, music, and this sounds super corny, but I do truly believe that musical is universal. Doesn't matter if you either connect with the music or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think, to me, I connect with the music itself first.
Mm-hmm.
And that language is universal. The lyrics will mean something at some point.
Yeah.
Or not. Like, for example, I love Rammstein. Rammstein is a German band, and I sing them live, and they are incredible.
60,000
do I know what they're saying? Absolutely not. I love Cigarettes.
Yeah, same.
It's another band.
No one knows what the hell they're saying.
No one knows what they're saying, but it's a fantastic music. So I would say I encourage people to approach that with bands in Spanish. There is
totally. I'd agree.
Such a fantastic array of diversity of bands, and especially if you're into rock, you're gonna find some gems that are unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean the way this album sounded, like it just, I mean, I could put some theories forward as to why like they didn't get bigger, but like that the music, I mean, because I think I was just so surprised by how much it sounded like music I'd already heard of the time period. Not exactly the same, not like it was derivative or anything, but just like it just blended with the era so well. And again, as someone I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I will say that the way that they treat the lyrics, like I still kind of got what was going on. I mean, especially I think it's in the song Ganas. There's the part they keep repeating El Corazon over and over again at various points, and like the way that they repeat it, and even like underneath, like the word kind of comes back later on in the song. It just if you don't know the language, they're sort of like pushing you to like, but you should make sure you know what this word means, like it's still like, and the fact that the word is El Corazon, meaning heart, and that it's kind of like beating underneath the song, like later on, it just like it feels like they're working on lots of levels here. Well,
and this we're gonna talk about this at some point. The singer for the band, Pablo Dañino, he's still around, and he's still very active in Venezuela with one of his other bands. But I think what's made him such a good singer is that he's very lyrical, and he uses his voice, has such a unique tone, and that he definitely used his voice as an instrument and tried to not only say the lyrics, but somehow kind of make sure that it just worked like a good balance between the music and the lyrics and the way he sings. He puts so much like feeling to it, that it just adds. Like how some singers are just they're there to deliver the story, tell the story with the lyrics, and that's fine. But I think because sometimes their lyrics on Sentimiento Muerto could be a bit abstract that make no sense.
Yeah,
but I think he just puts so much weight into each one of the words, the way he punches the syllables, and the way he carries, drags some puts its own personality in it that makes it very unique.
This is a common thread in a lot of the conversations we have, is that they do talk about people when they're talking about albums they believe are perfect, do say that there is je ne sais quoi, like there is the thing, there is the ineffable thing. And, I've heard it described as charisma before, if we're talking about actors, and actors we believe have a special power, and what is that thing that we can't put our finger on? And I do think that's maybe that's just this incredible thing about the creative process, right? Is that just by trying, you're like, well, I'm going to try and I'm going to pour every bit of, intention that I have into it. You used the word intentional earlier, that a perfect album has to be intentional. I feel like that emotional power that he is able to express through his voice has to just be the confluence of luck and talent and all those things that create something we can't describe.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about how about the career of these guys after the breakup of the band, and it sounds like the legacy is very strong, and like they're very revered in rightly so, I would say. Like, what do you think? What kind of bands from Venezuela that you know of, if you know of any, do you feel like are carrying the torch nowadays?
Nowadays,
for Venezuelan rock bands.
Sure. I think, first of all, to me, but Sentimiento Muerto, one of the most important things is that from that band, after they broke up, some of the greatest bands came out. Callayo, who was the guitar player,
he passed, right?
He passed. He just, I think it was his 20+ anniversary of his death. Yeah. But after he broke up with the band, after the band broke up, they basically, him, the bass player and the drummer, kind of branched out and created another band called Dermis Tattoo, which for many people arguably the greatest Venezuelan band. Yeah. And they were incredible. They only released one album, and it's a perfect, that's another perfect album, which you cannot find online, unfortunately.
Okay.
Because I was going to nominate that one. So that left a huge legacy. Those I got to see live, and it was mind-blowing. And then the singer, Pablo Dañino, he's had a long career, and now he has a band right now called Los Pixel, and it's fantastic, and they are strong going. And the other guitar player, Pinguino, he was in countless different bands that left a huge mark in Venezuela. Wincho, the bass player, he was in a couple different bands. I think he still plays in Venezuela. So they definitely left a huge legacy.
Sure. Yeah.
And right now, I mean, it's interesting because what happened with Venezuelan rock is that when I was there in the 90s, I think the biggest problem with Venezuelans in general is that we never appreciate what we have until we don't have it anymore.
I'm going to give you 3 million points. 3 million points for the Venezuelan education that you've given us.
It's true. It's a fact. And like, if any Venezuelans don't agree with me, I'm like, I think you're wrong. It's just our issue, unfortunately, especially when it came to music culture, is that we revere things that came from the outside first. So any band from outside Venezuela was huge. Like bands from Argentina, from Mexico, from Colombia, and they're fantastic. Don't take me wrong. They were like Soda Stereo, Fito Páez, Café Tacuba, Maná. All those bands did great musicians. And Venezuelan bands, we always were like, well, but they're from here, so they're just not as good. What happened in the last 15 years, I would say, with the huge migration of Venezuelans living the country, is that we've come to appreciate more what we had. And realized, like, oh no, hold on, we had a huge amount of fantastic music that it was created, especially on the 80s, 90s, 2000s. There is countless albums that are phenomenal, musicians that are incredible, that said some wonderful things. And I think now there's almost like a renaissance of loving the Venezuelan music. And like revering it. A lot of it came from, I don't know if you know, probably like 2 years ago, there was this documentary that came out on Netflix about the history of Venezuela, of Latin American rock.
I think I know.
It's actually it's good, but it was definitely focused on Argentina, Mexico, which granted they have such a deep history of music in general.
Yeah.
And a lot of Venezuelans, this was a huge discussion, a lot of Venezuelans, we felt just pushed aside. There was just a small mention of Sentimiento Muerto, and I think of this other band called Amigos Invisibles. I think after that, there was a lot of bands started popping up on Instagram and saying like, oh, hold on, we also had this album. And it was like a rediscovering of the music and realizing like, oh, we've always had a huge, rich history of Venezuelan rock.
Hell yeah.
And now I'm able to appreciate it more. And I think us, because we left the country, a lot of Venezuelans, because of nostalgia, we're rediscovering a lot of music. Even myself, there's some bands that when I was a kid, I was sort of like, I'd rather listen to Metallica. I'd rather listen to Radiohead. I'd rather listen to this other band. And now I'm listening to them like, oh my God, they were ahead of their time. This album is fantastic. How come I did not like them?
It seems to be a very common thing to look externally, especially when you're dealing with whatever kind of turmoil you might be going through at home. You're like, well, I need to look outside, look for something different.
And honestly, like, especially living in Venezuela, it's and I think in Latin America, it's that sense of the colonization, meaning the colonized mind of whatever comes from the outside is better than what you have.
Right.
So it was always, it's one of those ingrained things that you are like, oh, well, the music from the US or from Europe or the music from somewhere else, it's better than what we make. So that's what we should look up to. That should be the goal. And I bring it back to Sentimiento Muerto. Like, this album sounds a lot like bands from the 80s, from like The Cure or Depeche Mode. And there is a little bit of the identity is lost a little bit, which to me is kind of like the downsides of this album. And I think they were able to find it more in the third album and their work afterwards.
So what you're saying is that part of your reason why this is a perfect album is because it will inherently lead you onto their other album. 100%. And that, thusly, it's a bit of a gateway drug as an album for Venezuelan rock.
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, there are great bands that are going strong right now from Venezuela, and that's Zapato Tres, which is a phenomenal band, which they just played in LA about 2 months ago. Phenomenal, Zapato Tres. I think they're about to release a new album. Desorden Público is a band that never stopped playing. They've been around forever. Yeah. And they are great. Caramelos de Cianuro is another band they're pretty popular. Amigos Invisibles, it's a band that is also never stopped playing. They also, they won Grammys and all the awards.
We're gonna get some links out there for the people. Oh, yeah. We'll get some links.
I also found the name of the documentary on Netflix called "Break It All: The History of Rock in Latin America."
Yeah. Oh, cool. So. Okay, I'm gonna check that out.
I think it's very skewed towards one type of music, but that's just
it's necessary context, I suppose.
Yes, but it's good. It's good.
You've done a bang up job here, sir. And so now it's time to go to the board, see the points that you collected, and see what a case you made, and then give it to our guy Michael to make the final decision as to whether this album will be included in the pantheon. So I gave you 3 million points for our crash course in Venezuelan culture. I'm calling that Venezuela 101. 60,000 points for digging Rammstein. I gave you 100,000 points. I don't think I told you this one. I gave you 100,000 points for saying it felt like Caracas. Maybe I did tell you that sense of place that it brings about for you, that transportative quality, super important for this case. 3 million points for saying that the reason they separate themselves from other new wave bands and other bands of the era is because they're from Venezuela, and that's the core. That's the core of the thing. 9 million points for music being in your blood, and for you having that opportunity to be a rock star, even for just a few moments in your past. I'm glad you had that opportunity. And then you gave Michael 5 out of 5 crossed hearts graffitied on a wall for his 60-second recap. So ultimately, I'm thinking this is a pretty strong board. But like I said, the decision does come down to one man, and that man is Michael Osinski. He's a Scorpio. He's handsome. He's kind. He's Michael Osinski. Michael, tell us, you heard the case that Miguel made. Is Sin Sombra No Hay Luz by Sentimiento Muerto a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
I do believe it can join El Pantheon.
Love it.
See, I love it. You did it, Miguel.
Awesome, man. This was great.
We did it, Miguel.
Okay, Miguel, we also chose a standout track from this album.
Great.
Do you want to know what it is?
I would love to.
We actually went with the title track. We thought that this would be a great one to play out on. Kind of showcases so much of the power of the album, so much of what they do well.
Yes.
Kind of ties it to this 80s sort of Depeche Mode, The Cure kind of atmosphere that we've been talking about so much in here, and it's just a killer ass song. Michael, yeah. you agreed? You also enjoyed this one?
Yeah, sometimes when we're choosing songs, often like I won't necessarily choose what my favorite song is on the album, because a lot of times we like, Tyler and I like to think about what's a great way to end an episode, or we think about what the guest track was and how can we sort of contrast that a little bit. And for me, the title track feels like it has sort of a contrasting energy to Resiste. Yeah. So if we're giving like a more broad picture of what the album entails, like it felt like a good compliment to the one you picked, Miguel. And
I think you're absolutely right. I think since Sombra No Hay Luz, it's a better example of what that album sounds like.
Sure.
It is. Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, Miguel, it was great to meet you, since I haven't met you yet, even though apparently we were both in Chicago at the the time at some point, which we'll talk about that offline, in the what do they call breakout room, in the Zoom breakout room. But thank you so much for joining us and for bringing this album to us. I mean, I don't want to speak for Tyler, but I love when we have to listen to an album for the first time. We've never heard of it.
That's the best. I love it.
Being introduced to music is always something I enjoy.
Yeah,
you gave us a gift, and especially when it can broaden our global perspective on music. I'm really into that.
Thank you for having me, man. I mean, I love it. This is fantastic. I mean, I got to sit here and just boast about music first. Then about Venezuelan music, in particular this band. So just me having to sit down and talk about music in general is fantastic, but being able to share Venezuelan rock, it means so much to me and so much to people, especially people that no longer are able to live in Venezuela. So I'm just so proud to be able to do that.
Well, dear listeners, thanks so much for joining us this week. And I guess we'll see you next week. Or hear you. You'll hear us. I do this all the time. You can't see us. You can't see us. Have a good week, listeners. We'll see you next week. We'll see. God damn it. Let's just end the episode.
Bye.